Engines roared like thunder at the edge of my property. Gravel crunched beneath heavy treads as a yellow bulldozer crept toward my cedar fence. Men in orange vests shouted over each other, one waving a gloved hand toward the driver. "Take it down!" yelled a voice that made my stomach turn. Greg Wallace, the HOA president himself. His words cracked through the air like a gunshot. I bolted out of my kitchen barefoot, the cold morning dew soaking into my feet as I sprinted across the lawn. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the machine's growl. "Stop that bulldozer! You're on my property!" I screamed, waving my arms like a madwoman. But Greg didn't flinch. He stood there, khaki pants, polo shirt tucked just a little too tight, that smug little smile of his carved into place, clipboard in hand as if it were a badge of authority. The bulldozer's blade screeched against the first board, sending a shudder through the entire fence. I felt it in my chest, like the sound of something sacred being violated. Greg turned to one of the workers and said, "Keep going." She was warned. The man hesitated, glancing at the two police officers parked nearby. They stood with arms crossed, looking more confused than anything. One of them shifted uncomfortably. "Sir," I shouted to the closest officer, "this is private property. I have the land survey right inside my house." Greg laughed, that hollow, arrogant kind of laugh that makes your blood boil. "Then show me the deed," he sneered, his voice calm, almost amused. "Because according to our HOA records, that fence sits 3 feet into common property." "HOA records?" I snapped back. "You don't own this land, Greg. The county does, and my name's on it." Dust billowed around us as the bulldozer's engine revved again. My throat burned from shouting. The driver looked torn, one eye on Greg, the other on me. I could see the uncertainty in his posture, the way his hands hovered over the controls. He didn't want to be part of this mess. "Ma'am," one of the officers finally said, his tone hesitant, "maybe we should all calm down." "Calm down?" I cut him off, stepping closer to the fence. "They're trespassing." Greg's smirk widened. "We gave notice. You ignored it." "Notice?" That word made me snap. "You mean those threat letters you stuffed in my mailbox? Those aren't legal notices." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of diesel and freshly torn earth. A splinter of cedar flew past my face as the bulldozer jerked forward another inch. I could see my reflection in its metal blade. Small, furious, desperate. For a split second, I wondered if they'd really do it, if they'd actually destroy something I'd worked so hard to build just because one man decided to flex his authority. Neighbors started to gather on the sidewalks, murmuring. Some filmed on their phones, others just watched in stunned silence. Greg pretended not to notice. He kept his eyes locked on me, that same condescending look he'd given during every HOA meeting. The look that said, "You're just a homeowner. I run this neighborhood." But this time, something in me shifted. I wasn't backing down. Not again. "You take one more inch of that fence," I said, my voice low, shaking, "and I'll make sure every news station in this county knows what you just did." For the first time, Greg's face twitched. He looked at the officers, perhaps realizing this was no longer a quiet HOA power move. The driver cut the engine. Silence dropped heavy over the street, broken only by the faint creak of the bulldozer settling on the gravel. Greg muttered something under his breath and gestured for the men to step back. I stood there breathing hard, dust clinging to my skin, my heart still hammering in my chest. And that's when it hit me. That flash of cold, sinking realization that changed everything. They weren't bluffing. They had no idea I owned the survey lines they were standing on. When I bought this house, I thought I was buying peace. Turns out I was buying into a dictatorship with a neighborhood sign. It was supposed to be my restart. After Mark passed, I'd spent months searching for someplace quiet, someplace I could breathe again without every corner reminding me of him. The little ranch on Sycamore Lane looked perfect. Tree-lined street, children riding bikes, golden lights spilling through white-trimmed windows. A dream home for a woman who had fought hard just to keep standing. When I signed the papers, the realtor smiled too wide. "You'll love it here," she'd said. "Great community, very well managed." I didn't realize then that well managed meant micromanaged. The first week was perfect. I painted the kitchen yellow, unpacked my grandmother's dishes, and spent evenings on the porch listening to crickets. Then came the knock. Two women in pastel cardigans and one man in a pressed polo. "Welcome to the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association," they sang in unison, handing me a binder thick as a law textbook. Inside, rules about mailbox height, fence color, acceptable garden plants, and even the kind of curtains allowed in street-facing windows. I laughed nervously. "You guys are serious about your lawns, huh?" The man stepped forward. Tall, mid-50s, hair slicked back like he'd never met a mirror he didn't love. "Greg Wallace," he said, extending his hand. "I'm the HOA president. We keep things orderly around here, prevent chaos." "Chaos?" I asked, smiling faintly. He smiled back, but his eyes didn't. "It's amazing how quickly disorder spreads if you don't have someone watching." At the time, I brushed it off. I thought he was just another overzealous neighbor. It wasn't until spring that I realized what order meant to Greg Wallace. The fence behind the house had been leaning since the day I moved in. Weathered, split boards, nails sticking out like thorns. It wasn't safe for the neighbors' kids or mine when my sister visited with her twins. So I did what any responsible homeowner would do. I hired a licensed contractor, pulled a city permit, and installed a new cedar fence. It matched the tone of the neighborhood perfectly: clean, warm, sturdy. The next morning, there was a bright orange tag stapled to it. "Notice of non-compliance." I thought it was a mistake. I walked down to Greg's house, the one with the perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges, and knocked. He opened the door still wearing that same smug half-smile. "Morning, Greg. There must be some mix-up. I got a permit for the fence." He leaned against the doorframe. "City permits don't override HOA standards, Rachel. You use non-approved materials." "Non-approved? It's cedar." He shrugged. "We prefer vinyl. More uniform. I'll expect it replaced within 30 days. I blinked, thinking he had to be joking. "Greg, that fence is on my property." That's when he gave me the look, a smirk that told me he'd heard those words 100 times before and enjoyed crushing them. "Around here," he said smoothly, "we don't do personal property lines. We do community harmony." I remember standing there on his porch, the air thick with freshly cut grass and arrogance. I wanted to laugh, but something in his tone made my skin crawl. It wasn't about the fence. It was about control. When I got back home, I stared at that bright orange tag flapping in the breeze. The neighborhood looked perfect from the outside. White fences, green lawns, spotless driveways. But suddenly it felt staged, like a movie set hiding rot underneath. That was the first crack in the dream, the first sign that peace wasn't welcome here. And as Greg's words echoed in my mind, "We don't do personal property lines," I didn't know then how far he'd go to prove it. The first letter came folded like a death notice. Bold red ink. Violation. It was slipped under my door sometime before dawn. No envelope. Just a single sheet stamped with the Meadowbrook HOA logo. Unauthorized fencing material. Failure to comply will result in penalties. My hands trembled as I read it. I'd followed every rule, paid every fee, filed every permit. But here it was, my first official strike in Greg Wallace's quiet little war. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I emailed the board, attaching the contractor's invoice and city permit. The reply came a day later. "The HOA maintains its own architectural standards. Compliance is mandatory regardless of city approval. No signature, just Meadowbrook HOA board." By the end of that week, a second letter arrived. "Grass height exceeds regulation." I stared at my lawn, trimmed like a golf course, and laughed out loud. Then came another. "Trash cans visible from the street." Except they weren't. I'd kept them behind the fence. It was obvious now. This wasn't enforcement. This was harassment. The whisper campaign began soon after. Neighbors I'd chatted with every morning started crossing the street when they saw me. Conversation stopped when I stepped outside. I'd wave at the Johnsons across the cul-de-sac. They'd nod stiffly and hurry back inside. Even the kids who used to draw chalk rainbows on my driveway disappeared. The air around me felt colder, the silence thicker. It wasn't until Mrs. Donovan, my elderly neighbor with silver hair and kind eyes, knocked on my door one evening that I finally heard the truth. "Sweetheart," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Greg's been itching to reclaim that corner lot for years. Said it should have been common land. He's just using the fence as an excuse." "Reclaim?" I asked. "That's my land." She sighed, lowering her voice. "Greg thinks anything beyond the HOA's little map belongs to him. He's done it before. You're just the first one to fight back." That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers, the notices, the emails, the photos. The smell of coffee filled the room as I started what I'd later call my war binder. Every document, timestamp, and interaction went into it. I even started recording HOA meetings on my phone, just in case. Each week, a new letter arrived. $50 fine for non-compliance. $100 for failure to respond. $250 for continued violation. It was relentless. The tone got colder, more threatening. They accused me of endangering neighborhood cohesion. They even threatened to place a lien on my home. By the fifth notice, I stopped being scared. I got angry. I started marking every delivery, noting dates, even the time the letters appeared. Sometimes they were slipped under my door before dawn, sometimes taped to my fence like warnings in a mob movie. The final straw came on a windy Thursday afternoon. I was sitting on the porch when I heard footsteps on the walkway. Before I could get up, a shadow slid something under the door and hurried away. The paper looked different this time. Heavier, official-looking, with a bright red header that made my stomach drop. I unfolded it slowly. Final notice of demolition. The words screamed back at me, black ink against white paper. Beneath it, the date, 1 week from today. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. The fence swayed slightly in the wind outside. That same fence they now planned to destroy. I gripped the letter in both hands, my anger simmering into something colder, sharper. They wanted me scared. They wanted me silent. But all I could think was, not this time, Greg, because if they were planning to tear down my fence, they'd have to go through me first. The surveyor's boots crunched on gravel as he said the words I'd been praying for. "You're in the clear, ma'am. That fence is yours." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. The sound of that sentence, calm, certain, official, felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. His name was Evan Brooks, a licensed surveyor from the county seat. I'd found him through a local law office after realizing the HOA wasn't going to back down. He was the kind of man who didn't waste words. Steady voice, quiet eyes, and a clipboard that seemed to carry the weight of truth itself. The morning he arrived, the air was still damp from an overnight rain. Birds called from the maples overhead as he unloaded his tools. A tripod, laser level, and a long steel tape that gleamed in the early light. Each sound, the click of the tripod legs locking, the metallic snap of the tape, felt deliberate, scientific, undeniable. I watched him work, heart thudding, as he measured every inch from the corner markers to the fence posts I'd been accused of stealing. He didn't talk much while he worked, but I could tell he already suspected something. Every few minutes he'd frown slightly and jot something down in his notebook. The breeze carried the faint smell of wet cedar and diesel from the distant road, the air heavy with tension. When he finally straightened up and adjusted his cap, I braced myself. "Well," he said, glancing toward the fence line, "if anyone tells you that's on community land, they're lying. This fence sits a solid 2 feet inside your boundary. You've actually got extra room." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. Relief, anger, validation all tangled together. "You're sure?" I asked, though I already knew from the way he said it that he was. He nodded and smiled faintly. I'll file the report with the county this afternoon and send you a certified copy. If they try anything, you'll have legal proof." He patted the top of his survey case. "You've got nothing to worry about, Ms. Miller." Those words hit me harder than I expected. After weeks of lies, fines, and whispers, hearing someone tell me I was right felt like a lifeline. I thanked him about a dozen times before he packed up his tools and headed down the street. I stood there watching until his truck disappeared around the corner, feeling lighter than I had since moving into Meadowbrook. That afternoon, I made copies of every page of the preliminary report and added them to my binder. I even emailed a copy to the HOA, attaching a short note. "Professional survey confirms fence within property boundary. All claims are invalid." No response. Not even a smug reply from Greg. Just silence. For the first time in months, I slept with the windows open, the night air cool and still. I remember thinking, maybe it's finally over. Maybe proof was all it would take to shut them up. But peace never lasts long in Meadowbrook. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. The fresh wooden stakes Evan had driven into the ground, the ones marking my official survey lines, were snapped clean in half. The bright pink ribbons he'd tied fluttered weakly in the dirt, trampled into the mud. Tire tracks cut across the grass near the fence, leading back toward the main road. I stared at them in disbelief, my chest tightening. This wasn't random. It wasn't a prank. It was a message. Someone had come in the night and destroyed the evidence. I knelt down beside the broken stake, fingers brushing the splintered wood. The morning sun caught the edges of the pink ribbon, still clinging to a jagged fragment, and that's when it hit me. The truth wasn't enough to stop them, because someone didn't want the truth standing. Greg slammed his gavel so hard the mic squealed. "We're done debating. The fence comes down Monday." The sound rang through the room like a gunshot, bouncing off the cheap drywall of the Meadowbrook Community Center. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs, some pretending to look at their phones, others watching me with pity or curiosity. Greg sat at the head of the table, a smug grin tugging at his mouth, the HOA logo shining on the little brass nameplate in front of him. It was supposed to be an emergency compliance meeting. That's what the notice said. But I knew better. This was theater. Greg had called it on 2 days' notice, purposefully scheduled it for a weekday afternoon when most people couldn't attend. Except me. I made sure to show up, binder in hand, heart pounding so loud it nearly drowned out the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Let's keep this brief," Greg said, tapping his papers. "Homeowner Rachel Miller has refused to comply with repeated notices of violation. Her fence, built without HOA approval, violates our design standards and property boundaries. We've given her ample opportunity to correct it. She's chosen defiance." I stood to speak, but the mic on the podium gave a sharp pop, then went dead. "It's not defiance," I said loudly, trying to project my voice over the murmur. "It's my property, and I have a certified county survey proving that." Greg sighed dramatically, glancing toward the audience. "Folks, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Disruption, hostility. We're a community. We have rules." "I'm not disrupting," I shot back. "I'm defending what's mine." He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, relishing the control. "Our records show otherwise. The board has already voted." "Voted?" I cut in. "Without allowing me to present my evidence?" That earned me a sharp glare. "Mrs. Miller, you are out of order." Laughter rippled through the room from a few of Greg's loyalists in the back. My pulse thudded in my ears. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. The board members all sat stiffly, eyes down, clearly afraid to challenge him. I felt for my phone in my pocket, sliding it discreetly to record. If he wanted to play power games, fine. I'd make sure every word was on record. Legal nugget. In one-party consent states, you can record any meeting you're part of, and that includes HOA boards. Greg continued, flipping through his papers theatrically. "Given the homeowner's refusal to cooperate, the board hereby issues a final fine of $3,000 and authorizes the removal of the non-compliant structure effective Monday morning." The room erupted in murmurs. $3,000. My knees went weak for a second, but I kept my chin up. You're making a mistake, I said evenly. I have documentation that proves you're lying about the boundary line. And when this goes to court, every one of you sitting silent will be called to testify. Greg's smirk faltered, but only for a heartbeat. He straightened his tie and gave a mock sigh. We're sorry it's come to this. Meeting adjourned. He slammed the gavel again, and the board members rose instantly, filing out as if rehearsed. I gathered my binder slowly, aware of every pair of eyes watching me. Some sympathetic, others quietly relieved it wasn't them in my place. As I reached the door, I felt a presence beside me. Greg's voice dropped low, close to my ear, his breath heavy with coffee and arrogance. You'll regret crossing me, he whispered. I turned to face him, meeting his cold blue eyes with every ounce of defiance I had left. You've mistaken me for someone who scares easy, I said quietly. His grin twitched. I walked out before he could say another word, heart pounding but head clear. The night air hit me like a jolt, cool, sharp, grounding. Inside my purse, my phone was still recording, and Greg Wallace had just handed me the evidence I needed to burn his little empire down. I drove to the county office shaking with rage, and walked out holding Greg's worst nightmare, the original plat map. The drive there was a blur of anger and caffeine. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Greg's smug whisper, "You'll regret crossing me," still echoed in my head like a curse. The board meeting had been nothing but theater, a setup to humiliate me. But if Greg wanted to play bureaucratic chess, I was ready to beat him at his own game. The county recorder's office was an old brick building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like dust, toner, and history. Rows of filing cabinets stretched to the ceiling, each drawer labeled with decades of handwritten lot numbers. I approached the clerk's desk and said, "Hi, I need the original plat records for Meadowbrook Estates, including all easements and boundaries." The woman behind the counter looked up, her expression neutral but kind. "Oh, those old subdivisions keep us busy. You a homeowner?" "Yes, ma'am, and apparently a criminal, according to my HOA." That got a small chuckle out of her. She disappeared into the back and returned a few minutes later carrying a thick folder. Inside were yellowed plats, stamped and sealed by the county surveyor's office nearly 20 years ago. She spread one out on the counter. "You're lot 17? I nodded, heart thudding. She traced a manicured finger along a thin black line. "Well, here's the official boundary. Your rear property line extends 3 feet beyond this coordinate. That's your land, not common space. See that?" I leaned over the map, eyes stinging. 3 feet. That was the exact strip of land Greg claimed belonged to the HOA. The same ground he'd ordered bulldozed. For a moment, I just stared, the lines and numbers blurring together. Anger mixed with vindication. "Can I get certified copies?" I asked, my voice tight. "Of course." She pulled out a form. "These will be county certified. Keep them safe. They override any HOA map." Her words hit like music. Legal nugget. County plats override HOA common area maps. Always trust what's filed with the recorder's office, not what a board president waves around. When I stepped back out into the sunlight, clutching those stamped documents, I felt untouchable. Every detail, the lot number, the coordinates, the county seal, confirmed that Greg's so-called common land was actually mine. I stopped by the post office on my way home and mailed him a certified letter. Copies of the plats, survey data, and a firm but polite note. "Dear Mr. Wallace, per official county records and the attached certified plat maps, my fence sits within my property boundaries. Any further attempt at removal or interference will constitute trespass. Consider this your legal notice." I even paid extra for return receipt. I wanted to see his signature, to know he'd seen it. But days passed. No reply, no acknowledgement. The HOA website stayed quiet. The harassment letters stopped. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, the evidence had done its job. Then Friday morning came. I stepped out with my coffee and froze. Across the back of my fence, bright orange spray paint glared in the sunlight. Thick lines and arrows drawn directly onto the boards, cutting through the wood like graffiti. But the worst part wasn't the vandalism. It was where the paint stopped, on my side of the fence, exactly 3 feet in. I dropped my mug, porcelain shattering on the walkway. Someone had been here in the night, marking the same line I'd just proven belonged to me. The smell of spray paint still lingered in the cool morning air, sharp and chemical. My stomach turned. Greg hadn't replied because he didn't need to. He was already planning his next move. Greg yelled, "Start the engine." I yelled, "Sheriff's on his way." The street froze between two kinds of power. It was déjà vu in the worst way. The same bulldozer, the same crew in orange vests, the same smell of diesel thick in the morning air. Only this time, I wasn't running barefoot across wet grass. I was ready. My binder sat open on a lawn chair beside me, documents laid out like weapons, the certified plat maps, the survey report, and my latest email chain with the county recorder. Greg stood at the curb in his usual polo and khakis, sunglasses hiding his eyes but not his smirk. "You were warned, Rachel," he said loud enough for the neighbors gathering across the street to hear. "The board voted. The fence comes down today." I could see the uncertainty on the faces of the crew. One man wiped his brow and muttered to another, "Didn't she call the cops last time?" "You move that machine 1 inch, I said, my voice shaking but loud, "and you'll be personally liable for property destruction." I held up the county-stamped map. "This fence is on my land, and I have proof. You touch it, I'll see you in court." Greg rolled his eyes. "You don't understand how HOAs work, Rachel. This isn't about you. It's about community easements. Your little map doesn't change that. Community easements don't trump county property lines." I shot back. "I already checked with the county attorney." That was a lie, but a convincing one. The bulldozer's engine rumbled to life, and the noise vibrated through my chest. I could see the blade tilt forward, the metal glinting in the morning sun. A few neighbors gasped. Then in the distance came the wail of a siren. The bulldozer operator hesitated, turning toward the sound. Within seconds, a sheriff's cruiser rounded the corner and rolled to a stop behind Greg's SUV. The deputy stepped out. Tall, calm, with mirrored sunglasses and that no-nonsense posture that could silence an entire room. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice even. Greg immediately stepped forward, gesturing with his clipboard like a flag. "Officer, this is an internal HOA matter. This homeowner is in violation of community standards and—" The deputy raised a hand. "Sir, I asked what's happening, not for a speech." His gaze shifted to me. "Ma'am?" I handed him the folder. "I have official county plats and a certified survey showing this fence is entirely on my property. The HOA has ignored that and is attempting to demolish it anyway." He flipped through the papers, nodding slightly as his eyes scanned the seals and signatures. "These look legitimate." "When were they filed?" 2 weeks ago, stamped by the county recorder." Greg huffed, stepping closer. "She's twisting boundaries, Sheriff. That land was designated as a community buffer zone years ago." The deputy looked up. "You have documentation of that?" Greg opened his mouth but said nothing. He glanced toward one of the board members, who stared at the ground. "It's in our HOA map," he muttered weakly. The deputy closed the folder and handed it back to me. "County plats override HOA records. That's not a debate, sir." He turned toward the bulldozer crew. "Nobody touches that fence. You got me?" The operator quickly killed the engine. Silence washed over the street, broken only by a few murmurs from the watching neighbors. One of them whispered, "She actually stopped him." Another muttered, "About time someone did." Greg's jaw tightened. His face flushed red, but his tone stayed cold. "You're making a big mistake siding with her, Sheriff. The HOA will appeal this." The deputy took a slow step forward. "That's your right, but if any of your contractors cross that line again, they'll be trespassing." "Understood." For a long, heavy moment, Greg said nothing. Then he straightened his clipboard and muttered, "Fine. We'll handle this through other channels. I watched him retreat to his car, shoulders rigid, mask cracking just enough to show the fury underneath. The crowd began to disperse, neighbors whispering, some nodding at me, others pretending not to notice. I thought it was over. I wanted to believe that maybe finally, Greg had been put in his place, but as he climbed into his SUV, he turned his head just enough for me to see it. That same smile, slow and dangerous, curling at the corner of his mouth. And I knew right then, he wasn't backing off. He was regrouping. The night after the showdown, someone egged my fence and keyed my car. Message received. I woke to the sour stench of dried yolk baking in the morning sun. Yellow streaks splattered across the cedar boards that had nearly been bulldozed days before. My car's hood looked like it had been clawed by an animal. Deep, angry scratches etched in looping patterns. But it wasn't random. It was deliberate. Personal. At first I wanted to believe it was coincidence, a stupid prank. But as the day unfolded, I realized it was something darker. By noon, a neighbor texted me a screenshot from the Meadowbrook HOA website. Right there on the front page, under a bright red banner, it read, "Non-compliance alert. Ongoing violation at Lot 17. Homeowner refusing HOA mandates." My name wasn't printed, but everyone knew who lived at Lot 17. Within hours, the whispers started again. I heard them when I walked the dog. Fragments of sentences drifting over hedges. "She's suing the HOA. She's crazy." Greg said she forged those documents. Even the friendliest faces suddenly went cold. I felt the isolation close in around me like a fog. The same people who used to wave from their driveways now pulled their kids inside when I passed. My phone buzzed constantly. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, hang-ups. And then the letters began. No envelopes, just folded notes shoved under my doormat or taped to my mailbox. Each one written in a different hand. "Drop the lawsuit. People like you ruin neighborhoods. Sell before you're forced out." The paper always smelled faintly of cheap perfume and cigarette smoke. A small but unmistakable sign that this wasn't random. Greg had his fingerprints all over it. I tried to brush it off, but that illusion shattered the following week when Evan called. His voice was tense. "Rachel, someone broke into my truck last night. Slashed the tires, busted the mirrors. They didn't take anything, just trashed it." My heart dropped. "You think it's connected?" He didn't hesitate. "I parked it right outside your subdivision. Same night, your HOA had a meeting." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Greg wasn't just trying to scare me anymore. He was sending a message to anyone who helped me. I reported everything to the sheriff's office that afternoon. The deputy took photos, filled out forms, and shook his head. "You'd be surprised how many HOA disputes turn ugly," he said. "But vandalism and harassment? That's not an HOA issue. That's criminal." He was right. Legal nugget. Harassment or vandalism from HOA members can lead to criminal charges. File police reports, not HOA complaints. HOAs love to keep things in-house. But once it crosses the line into intimidation, it's no longer their jurisdiction. I filed my report, made copies for my binder, and installed cameras around the house. The first few nights afterward were silent, eerily so. Not even the usual hum of lawnmowers or kids on bikes. Just the occasional rustle of wind through the cedars, and my own pulse thudding in my ears as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Then something shifted. A reporter from the local station left a voicemail. "Hi, this is Amanda Ray from Channel 8 Investigates. We've received several complaints about the Meadowbrook HOA. Would you be willing to talk?" My heart raced. Someone was finally paying attention. Maybe this was my chance to turn the spotlight on Greg and his cronies, to expose what was really happening. I didn't call back right away. I wanted to gather my evidence, to make sure I had everything airtight before going public. But before I could even draft my response, there was another knock at the door. No one stood on the porch, just a delivery envelope resting against the step. Heavy, official-looking. Across the front, stamped in bold black letters, "Certified mail, HOA versus Rachel Miller." I froze, the air around me suddenly still. The birds stopped chirping, the wind died. It wasn't just harassment anymore. Greg was taking this war to court. When I saw their lawsuit, I didn't panic. I smiled. They just handed me discovery rights. The packet was thick, printed on heavy paper and laced with arrogance. Meadowbrook Homeowners Association versus Rachel Miller. Their claims: violation of community bylaws, defamation of board members, and obstruction of authorized maintenance. In plain English, I'd embarrassed Greg Wallace. But this time, I wasn't standing alone with a binder and a shaky voice. I was armed, legally and strategically. Her name was Lisa Porter, a sharp-eyed attorney out of Richmond who specialized in property and HOA law. She was the kind of woman who could make a room full of board members sweat with one raised eyebrow. When I sat across from her at her mahogany desk and told her everything, she didn't even blink. "Classic HOA overreach," she said, flipping through my documentation. "They think they're a government, but they're just a club with paperwork." I almost laughed. For the first time in months, someone else saw the absurdity and the danger. Lisa filed a countersuit within a week. Harassment, defamation, and trespass. She even requested damages for vandalism and emotional distress. "If they want to fight," she told me, "we'll give them one. In a courtroom, where rules actually matter." When the hearing date arrived, the courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and tension. Greg strutted in wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. Behind him, the HOA board members shuffled nervously, clutching clipboards like shields. Evan was already there, dressed neatly, hands clasped in his lap. He gave me a reassuring nod. Steady, calm, unshaken. The judge, a gray-haired woman with glasses perched low on her nose, glanced over the docket. "This is a property and bylaw dispute involving boundary determinations?" Lisa rose smoothly. "Your Honor, it's a harassment case disguised as a boundary issue. My client's fence is fully within her legal lot, confirmed by certified county plats and an independent survey. The HOA knowingly ignored this and attempted demolition without lawful authority." Greg's lawyer, a slick young man who looked straight out of a commercial, jumped in. "Your Honor, the HOA operates under its own charter. Mrs. Miller's fence violates community harmony and impedes common access." The judge's eyebrow arched. "Community harmony?" Lisa smirked. "Your Honor, if community harmony justifies trespass, vandalism, and defamation, then we've rewritten the Constitution." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Except from Greg. His jaw tightened, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Lisa presented the survey next. Evan took the stand, his voice calm and professional. "As a licensed surveyor, I verified the property line using county benchmarks. The fence is 2 feet inside Mrs. Miller's boundary, entirely on private land." "Were these results filed with the county?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor, certified and recorded." Lisa handed over the official plats, the county seal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Your Honor, the HOA's internal maps are outdated, unofficial, and in direct contradiction with these county filings." The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. "So the HOA attempted to demolish a structure on land it doesn't own?" Greg's lawyer stammered. "Well, technically, we believed—" "Belief doesn't override recorded law," the judge interrupted sharply. Greg shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw him squirm. Legal nugget. HOAs cannot enforce rules that contradict recorded property deeds. If your fence, home, or structure sits within your surveyed boundary, the HOA's authority ends at that line. Lisa wrapped up our case with quiet precision. Mrs. Miller followed every law, every permit, and every regulation. The HOA acted recklessly, and now they want to hide behind bureaucracy. The courtroom went silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock above the bench. The judge adjusted her glasses, looking from me to Greg. "I'll review the evidence and issue a ruling soon." Her hand reached for the gavel. Greg stared at me, eyes cold and furious. and as the gavel rose in slow motion, my breath caught in my throat. Verdict pending. The courtroom went silent. Then the judge said 7 words that made Greg's face go white. The fence stays. The HOA pays damages. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Then the gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. My breath caught somewhere between a sob and a laugh. After months of being bullied, threatened, and lied to, justice had finally spoken, loud enough for everyone to hear. Greg didn't look at me. He just sat there frozen, color draining from his face, fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. His attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Greg waved him off, jaw clenched. Across the aisle, Lisa Porter offered me the faintest smile, the kind that said, "We did it." The court awards the defendant reimbursement for legal fees and damages totaling $18,000. The judge continued. Additionally, the court finds that the HOA acted outside its authority by attempting to enforce rules contrary to recorded property boundaries. There it was, in black and white. The truth I'd been screaming for months finally printed into law. As we left the courtroom, a few of the HOA board members trailed behind us, whispering nervously. Greg followed last, shoulders rigid, his clipboard nowhere in sight. Outside, the air smelled like rain, heavy clouds rolling over the courthouse roof. I stood under the awning for a long moment, breathing it all in, the wet concrete, the faint scent of victory. By the time I got home, the local news was already calling. "We heard about the ruling," the reporter said. "Would you be willing to share your story on camera?" I didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. 2 days later, the headline ran on the front page of the Richmond Daily Chronicle. Homeowner defeats HOA in property dispute, court sees abuse of power. The story went viral in our county, picked up by smaller stations and homeowner forums online. Comments flooded the HOA's Facebook page, hundreds of them, demanding Greg's resignation. By the following week, he was gone. Officially, the HOA claimed he'd stepped down to focus on personal matters. But everyone knew the truth. The board held an emergency election, appointed a temporary president, and promised to review internal policies. Neighbors who'd avoided me for months began knocking on my door with awkward smiles and half-hearted apologies. "We didn't know how bad it was," one woman said. "Greg made it sound like you were breaking the law." Another man from 2 houses down brought a pie and muttered, "Guess we should have believed you from the start." I accepted their words politely, but inside I knew the scars ran deeper than fences or fines. Meadowbrook had turned its back when I needed it most, and that kind of silence doesn't fade easily. Still, the victory was mine. The fence stood tall, the cedar gleaming in the sunlight, stronger than ever. One afternoon, Evan stopped by in his truck, new tires shining where the old slashed ones had been. "You did it," he said, grinning. "I knew the law would catch up." "It took a while," I admitted, smiling faintly, "but the truth always wins in the end." He nodded, then pointed toward the fence. "You keeping it the same color?" "Exactly the same," I said. "Let it stand as a reminder." That night, for the first time in months, I slept with the windows open. The sound of crickets filled the air, soft and rhythmic. But somewhere around midnight, I woke suddenly, not to silence, but to a low rumble outside. Through the curtains, headlights glowed faintly, idling at the end of my driveway. The engine hummed, steady, patient. I stood frozen by the window, watching as the car lingered there, engine low, lights off, before slowly rolling away into the dark. Greg might have lost the court battle, but the war between us wasn't over yet. For the first time in months, the sound outside my window wasn't engines. It was wind through cedar. The mornings felt different now, quieter, gentler. Sunlight spilled through the blinds and pooled across the kitchen table, where stacks of legal papers had once lived. I used to wake with a knot in my stomach, bracing for whatever new letter or fine Greg's board would invent that day. But now the only thing waiting at the door was the morning paper and the smell of freshly cut grass. The fence still bore scars from the war. A few cracked boards, faint traces of spray paint that even 3 coats couldn't completely hide. But to me, those imperfections were battle marks, proof of what I'd survived. One Saturday, I decided to rebuild the damaged sections myself. The rhythmic sound of hammer against nail felt therapeutic, grounding. Each thud echoed like a promise. My property, my peace. Evan stopped by midway through, his truck rolling up the drive just as I was wiping sweat from my forehead. He climbed out, hands tucked in his pockets, that easy grin spreading across his face. "You always did better work than my crew," he joked, looking over the freshly replaced panels. "Guess I finally learned how to defend my lines," I said, laughing softly. He leaned against the fence, eyes scanning the property. "You know, I've worked a lot of boundary disputes, but this one," he shook his head. "You set a precedent. People around here won't forget that." "I don't want them to," I said. "I want them to remember what happens when you stop letting fear run your life." Evan smiled, nodded once, and handed me a small envelope. "You'll like this." Inside was a copy of the county's official map, newly updated. Lot 17, my lot, marked clearly, with no question about the boundary lines. Under it, stamped in bold, owner, Rachel Miller. Fence within property line. Verified. For the first time, I let myself laugh freely. Not the sharp, defensive laugh I'd used for months, but something real. "Guess that's closure," I said. "Closure," he echoed, "and maybe a new start." And in many ways, it was. The HOA held its first restructured meeting that spring. New leadership, people who actually listened, people who promised transparency. The bylaws were rewritten, meetings made public, and Greg's name was quietly removed from every record. No one spoke of him anymore, but his shadow lingered like the ghost of a storm that had passed through and left the landscape changed forever. Neighbors who once avoided me now stopped by with smiles and small talk. Mrs. Donovan brought over cookies one afternoon, whispering, "You gave the rest of us courage, dear." Even the kids who'd vanished from my lawn months ago started playing in the street again. The cul-de-sac had finally exhaled, but peace, as I learned, doesn't mean stillness. It means strength. That's when the idea struck me. A blog. It started small, yourfenceyourright.com, a place for homeowners to share stories, find resources, and learn how to fight back legally against overreaching HOAs. I posted my story first, adding scanned copies of my survey, the court ruling, and even snippets of advice from Lisa Porter. To my surprise, within a week, the site had hundreds of comments. People from all over the country, Arizona, Texas, Florida, each with their own Greg trying to intimidate them. I spent late nights responding to messages, guiding people through property record lookups, explaining their rights. The same fear I once lived with was now fuel, a way to help others reclaim their peace. One evening, as I sat at my laptop with a mug of coffee, the last rays of sunset spilling across my desk, a new message pinged in my inbox. "Hi Rachel," it began. "I think my HOA is about to do the same thing to me." I stared at the screen, a familiar chill running down my spine. Peace had finally found me, but it seemed the battle was just beginning for someone else. If you think your HOA can't cross your property line, think again. They count on you not knowing your rights. I learned that the hard way. What started as a simple home improvement project, just rebuilding a broken fence, turned into a full-blown war for my property, my dignity, and my peace of mind. The bulldozers, the fines, the smear campaign, the lawsuit, it all boiled down to one truth. Power corrupts easily when no one stands up to it, and Greg Wallace thought no one ever would. But I did. Looking back, the sleepless nights, the legal bills, the fear, it was all worth it. Because now that cedar fence stands not just as a boundary, but as a symbol, a line that says, "This is mine. You don't get to take it." I learned more about property law in 6 months than I ever wanted to. And I learned just how far an HOA will go when they think you'll fold under. Pressure. They send letters meant to intimidate you, use fines like weapons, and twist community rules into tools for control. But the thing is, those rules end where your deed begins. So here's what I want every homeowner watching this to remember. First, get a survey, a real, licensed one. Don't rely on old maps or neighborly assumptions. File that survey with your county and keep a certified copy. It's your shield in any boundary fight. Second, know your recording rights. If your state allows one-party consent, record every HOA meeting, every confrontation, every threat. Evidence beats ego every time. Third, never let intimidation silence you. These organizations thrive on fear and compliance. The moment you push back with knowledge and proof, their power starts to crack. For me, it wasn't just about offense. It was about principle. If I'd let them bulldoze it once, they'd have done it again. To me, or to the next homeowner who couldn't afford to fight back. Now my story is out there, in the papers, online, even in the HOA forums where board members whisper my name like a warning. I've heard they use me as a case study in their meetings now. Good. Let them. Because what they should really fear isn't the next lawsuit. It's the next Rachel Miller who refuses to bow down. So if you're watching this and you've faced a power-drunk HOA like Greg's, tell me your story in the comments. I want to hear how you fought back, or how you plan to, and hit like if you'd stand your ground for what's rightfully yours. Because this fight doesn't end with me. It continues every time a homeowner says, no more. And if you think Greg's story is over, think again. Because his replacement, well, he tried something even worse on my neighbor. And trust me, that's a story you'll want to hear next.